Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Cook and I'm with Alba Wheels Up International. Welcome to AAEI's latest industry webinar. For this event, we're going to be focusing on the understanding the role of technology in supply chain resiliency. How can the Internet of Things, AI, and real-time analytics leverage data and transform visibility, compliance, and risk management in our industry? I've got three experts joining me for this, so let me introduce them. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Noel Haciega from Port of Long Beach, an organization he's been with more than 15 years. Noel is the Port's Chief Operating Officer. Noel also sits on a number of boards, including those of the Coalition of America's Gateways and Trade Corridors and the Containerization and Intermodal Institute. Welcome, Noel.
Good to be here. Thanks, Daniel.
Christopher Chase also joins us. Chris is the Assistant Director of Marketing at the Port of Los Angeles. Chris has significant industry experience from his time with a carrier before moving to the Port. Chris has been with the Port of LA for almost 25 years. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, thank you.
And our final member of the panel is my friend and colleague, Vince Icapella. Vince is the EVP of Strategic Growth and President of Government and Trade Relations for Alba Wheels Up International. Vince also sits on the boards of the AAEI, UCLA Anderson Forecast, and the LA Chamber of Commerce. He also served on the Federal Advisory Committee of COAC, the Customs Operations Advisory Committee. So a quick few housekeeping rules before we start. We're recording this webinar and we'll send out a link later. You'll also have access to the AAEI white paper on the role of technology in supply chain resiliency. If you have any questions, just use the Q&A feature of this platform down at the bottom there. And before we get started, I want to pass it to the panel for any initial questions. Anything you'd like to add, chaps?
Yeah, I will open it up a bit. Thank you, Daniel and Chris and Noel and Angela for making the time. I just want to take the opportunity to thank AAEI and also the Supply Chain Resiliency Committee. The white paper was the basis for this webinar. A lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about today come out of that paper. Before we dive in, I just wanted to frame the conversation that we've seen some disruption that we haven't seen before, starting in 2020 with the pandemic and all the demurrage and detention, and that in a lot of ways that shaped a lot of the issues that the committee worked on in 2021, 22. A lot of discussion on the West Coast. A lot of the people on the committee, some of the people on the committee were also involved in the Port of Long Beach e-commerce task force, which dealt with Noel's support, which dealt with a lot of those issues. Add on to that tariffs of this year, resourcing and new sourcing out of different countries, diversifying sourcing out of different countries of origin, geopolitical issues, USMCA. So it's really not a luxury to have the technology driving this value. It's really table stakes now to really keep the supply chains resilient, get supply chain visibility and the gaps. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Daniel, who's going to help me out on the panel, asking the questions and keeping us moving. So I'll turn it over to Daniel to start the questions.
Absolutely, and just a reminder to the audience that use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen there, and your questions will come through to me, and then I'll pose them to the panel here. So panel, concerning the topic of the day, how have recent global disruptions changed the way you think about supply chain resilience?
Probably, I'm going to help out here and point a little bit to maybe Noel. Maybe you could kick that off if you're comfortable with it.
Absolutely. Let me start by building on what Vince said to set the scene. I've been at the Port of Long Beach almost 16 years. And in those 16 years, we've had some form of disruption every single year. In fact, I like to say there hasn't been a normal year since I've been here at the port, and there probably never will be. And to your question, Daniel, about resilience, I think that the definition of supply chain resilience continues to evolve. I harken back to the days even before the pandemic, Vince, ocean carrier realignment, consolidation. Then we had the largest bankruptcy in ocean carrier history. That impacted the Port of Long Beach directly because at the time, Hanjin Shipping owned our largest terminal by volume, right? And then since then, back in 2018, 2019, under the first Trump administration, we were impacted by shifting trade policies, new tariffs, And then what we're going through this time around, which by the way is not even a repeat of the same movie, that it's not even a sequel, it's a completely different movie involving similar characters and similar actions. But what we're all going through together has forced us all to redefine resiliency and really think about resilience more globally. I would say that as a port authority, from where I sit in my chair, resilience has to be broader than just keeping goods moving through our gates, through our port, through our docks. We have to think about the broader supply chain. We have to think about our partners, the ocean carriers, the railroads, the motor carriers. We have to think about all of you, those who use these different modes and use our port to make sure that goods keep moving. Our business is about delivering goods and commodities for buying and selling as quickly as possible. It's about speed of market, removing any barriers and doing everything that we can so that when containers cross our docks, they can cross so in as little time as possible without any type of disruption. Resilience for us and for our customers emphasizes diversified sourcing, flexible logistics, and the ability to pivot quickly during changes and disruptions. And I know that my colleague Chris from the Port of LA can say the same, but each of our ports serve more than 200,000 different shippers. That's how many different users we have in our port complex. And each of them have their own information systems. Some of them are very basic, very archaic, some would say, and then others have very sophisticated systems. And so our ability as a port authority to offer as much flexibility to each of these users to help meet their needs becomes increasingly important. That's where resilience comes in. By digitizing the supply chain, for example, we're maximizing visibility and efficiency in cargo movement by enabling shippers to track their cargo through the supply chain, enabling them to make scheduling, planning, and payment decisions prior to cargo arrival. It's all about making cargo movement more efficient, and in that efficiency, more sustainable. So for example, having more information allows our terminal operators to work more efficiently to reduce the number of lifts per container. Terminal operators then can plan for container pickups. Shuffling or restacking of containers is reduced thanks to advanced planning pickup. So I would just sum up what I've said so far. Ports are at the center of this business continuity. We limit downtime. We try to keep cargo moving. We sustain jobs. We protect the global supply chain when shocks occur. And just to bring all this home, this year is a prime example. Here you have the nation's busiest port complex, Port of Long Beach, Port of LA. We're in record territory, and yet you're not seeing any backlogs, any congestion. You're not seeing any delays. To me, that's what you want when you think about resilience.
Thanks,
Chris,
Noel.
I'm going to pass it to Chris as well, but let me repeat the question, and if you have examples, please do include them. How have recent global disruptions changed the way you think about supply chain resilience?
So, well, I think Noel obviously covered a lot of the high level facts that we all deal with because of our neighboring port operations. I think the one thing Noel touched on that is, of course, very much part of this resiliency is the people. You know, we have both of us, the day-to-day dock laborers here are a big part of that resiliency. Them being here with the tools they need to make this happen. And of course, the having the more data at their fingertips and the manager's fingertips, all better ways to move that cargo. And you know, resiliency, you know, making sure they're there every day. I mean, we think about all the work we did 5 years ago to make sure they were safe to work on the docks to deal with that. But I think Noel's right. One of the biggest things that we've seen here is both of us, you know, several times in the post-COVID era, have seen record volumes, and yet you don't see any ships backed up. You don't see any, you know, delays anywhere. Nothing more than that. And that is probably a great testament to all the great effort that everyone's gone into, and brought this industry further into what we're going to talk about for the rest of the day, which of course is a lot of the digital components that we have, you know, hadn't been there before, are here now, and how to build on them, how to use them. Then of course the big ones in the future of what's next. And that's always the, as Noel pointed out, you know, 16 years for him, not 1 year's been the same, and not 1 year doesn't have some sort of issue. And that's, you know, basically discusses shipping for the last, I don't know, 2,500 years. You know, everything is always an issue. There's always something strange and different happening. But that's just par for the course. But that's why we do this. And by being siloed into our different realms is not working. And it certainly doesn't work today when the volumes are this high, the stakes are this large, and all these customers of us and of our shipping lines, and obviously all the members that you have, it makes a big difference, and it costs a lot of money to have things fail. And that's exactly what none of us want to do.
Excellent. Vince, I want to pose this next one to you initially. So because of some of the updates to the tariffs and things during the summer, things have become a little bit more expensive to import. And so we've seen some of our clients kind of take a step back in their spend somewhat. So with that in mind, what do you think are some of the most appropriate strategies for saving costs, but what's still remaining flexible and ready for the inevitable surprises that we get?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. And I just building on what Noel and Chris said, absolutely. We have, again, the AI committee, we dealt with demurrage and detention in 2021, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later on more specifically. And then the tariffs, but also you have, we've talked about this in previous AI events and live events, where there are these regulatory issues now on tariffs, on UFLPA, on forced labor, that are not, that if not handled properly, stop goods from getting to market and become supply chain disruption issues and sit on the docks at Long Beach and LA, right? Regulatory concern as it relates to supply chain disruption and getting to market. And I'm going to probably take a different, an observation that I think up until the first 20 years of the century, tech and optimization, and now we have AI, even before AI, was all about reducing cost minimization, right? And I think when you go into the pandemic and then you go into the tariffs, it's more about mitigating disruption, right? So instead of saying, well, how much is it going to cost me to do it? How much is it going to cost you not to do it, right? How much will it cost you not to leverage those services, visibility, supply chain visibility tools, de-risking tools? Many AAEI members have solutions out there, our company included. So that's the change that I see, is that it's table stakes, and also it's not, we want to reduce costs, right? We want to preemptively reduce costs always. But now we're in a different environment where you have to mitigate the risk as well. And I see the focus on that. So.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about technology for a moment there. So which technologies, when considering, say, AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain, are making the biggest difference in visibility and forecasting of your port? Chris, let's put that one to you.
Well, thanks. We started a process of digitalization almost 10 years ago now. We have a product called the Port Optimizer, which we did in conjunction at the time with GE Transportation, which has since been bought by Wabtec Corp. But that is what we started. We started with a port community system. The more simple thing than AI or any of those other pieces, it was, how do we get visibility? And we have all these silos that everybody works in, and no one really wants to share it, and no one wants to share their data and all the other pieces of it. It was a big, heavy lift, but it was identified as just an area which, of course, prevented a lot of us from making better decisions. And so we went with this port community systems, and port community systems have been around for decades. Europe has led that charge for many, many years, and most of those surrounded things like customs entry or vessel operations, just because they do the operations world in where they are is a little different than us with feeder vessels and barges, et cetera. So, but what we really went after was, the decision was, well, gosh, I didn't know this volume was coming at us. We both Noel and I have deal with ships that, come on, all of a sudden they're throwing a ship that's twice as large on a service with no preemptive information. But how do we do that? And so we kind of jumped in that realm. And what we have done, and that I would argue our biggest success with the Port Optimizer has been what we call our daily signal, which is merely a look forward of about 3 weeks. The existing week is 2 weeks out of cargo that's actually on ships. And we put this out daily. Anybody's welcome to sign up and get it. And it just shows you what's coming at us. And I can tell you, I know that there's about 100,000 containers arriving this week in the Port of Los Angeles. And I know next week is a little bit higher, and the week after that's quite a bit lower. And this is all just information that we get. But this was something that wasn't here a few years ago. And we also dumped on top of that, we have feeds from customs, so it's actually cargo that's loaded, and then we have carrier and terminal data. So we can do both tracking and tracing, and this, what we call our control tower with the signal, is seeing what's coming at us. And that, to us, has been the biggest thing that's moved us forward in the sense that of just that visibility tool. And then the next question is that we're, coming to, how does the newer technology, when we started this, blockchain was a big thing on the block. Sorry for the pun there. But that was the big news, right? And that really never materialized into what we do at this point. I think there's other areas in which it has been successful, but it just hasn't materialized here. Everybody thought it was coming this direction, but now it's a little different. But at the end of the day, the same thing Noel's group is doing, the same thing as us. We're trying to get that information out to as many people as possible so they can make a better decision what's going on. And if it goes into the AI realm, of course, this is actual data. Can someone use this to make a better decision? We hope so, because we certainly don't want cargo sitting on our docks. Noel and I at the 2 ports faced huge issues 5 years ago because people didn't move things off our docks, and they kept buying stuff and shipping it without picking it up. But that kind of information, what we learned from all this, what did we learn from this to make those next better decisions? And more importantly, what people can take from that into their organizations and use this data amongst other data to make a better decision for them. Machine learning. And that's the whole idea of what we're trying to do. We actually have a 6-month predictor in our system that will go out and give you predictions on this. Obviously, using past information is a little challenging on this one because, we didn't really have a thought process for tariffs that move constantly for day-to-day operations, and that just, of course, screws all that stuff up. But we have that baseline in which we can work from, and saying this is the area we want to be in. Both Noel and I have numbers that we know every month. If we hit these numbers, it's a good month. If we're a little bit less, it's an okay month. And if we really miss it, we have problems. And we haven't seen that yet, although we've seen huge peaks and valleys this year. We haven't quite gotten to it's a problem, but we're in that mode at the moment. It's not looking as good as it once did. And we need to know that so we can plan, but it also allows everybody else to plan.
So Noel, I'll come to you in a moment, but a question's come in which is closely related to what Chris was talking about. So, and you also touched on detention and demurrage and cybersecurity, which we'll talk about in a moment too. The question's come in, it says, how far in the future will terminal operators be able to use predictive analytics to provide drayage pickup appointments even before the vessel is berthed? And I brought this to you because you were talking about the surprise double-sized ship that was coming in that you didn't know about last week, kind of thing.
Yeah. This is, Noel and I are landlord ports. So we build, we lease. We don't do the day-to-day operations. I think every terminal, we each have 6 container terminals operating in our facilities. Every terminal is going to be a little different. The big challenge, of course, with all of what that question revolves around is, when can I pick it up before the vessel arrives? And that's a moving target because the ships, arrive at a certain time. The labor shift starts, you move, but that far in advance is a little tough. And that's going to be something that's probably a little bit farther in the future because there's so many variables. And each terminal and each customer is going to look at it differently. And, can you make a decision on that? But does everything have to be cleared ahead of time? If you're saying, yeah, you can pick it up at this certain time, but you haven't cleared it, well, that doesn't work. So, I think there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. So I think it's not quite ready for prime time, but I think we're getting close. And I think people will do that. But of course, at the same time, we also have the human element. What happens if that truck driver doesn't show up? What happens if his dispatcher moves it, says, I got a hotter box than yours. I got to move that more importantly. I don't know. That's some of the stuff that makes this a little more challenging, a little farther out there because of all the possibilities in that realm. And I know AI can cover a lot of that, but again, the last minute variables. So if I say today, I want to pick a box up on Monday, that's great, but there's a lot of things between here and there. And here in Southern California, Noel and I are very much aware that it's raining, and that doesn't do well by us. It's kind of the equivalent of it snowing in DC. Things do not go well when that happens.
So Noel, let me repeat the question for you, and then a question's coming, which I'll direct to you as well. So considering the technologies out there, AI, internet, Internet of Things, and blockchain, what are, let me say that again. Considering the technologies, AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain, what's making the biggest difference in visibility and forecasting at your port?
Yeah, and you know, I think what Chris said laid a good foundation for how we see the role of technology as a port authority, specifically as a landlord port authority. But let me make this observation, and this is something that I've seen over the years. Technology is evolving so rapidly, it catches headlines. What's the latest innovation? What's the latest tool? The reality is that technology in and of itself is not a solution. It's a tool. It becomes a solution when it's properly integrated into an operation, into a business model. And what I like about your question is that it talks about technology as a strategic enabler. I mean, there's certain things that technology will never, ever be able to replace. In a system like ours, we're a system of systems that, you know, that cuts across multiple industries and sectors. You're always going to need these different processes. From a port authority standpoint, when we talk about visibility, when we talk about predictive analytics and applying technology to make the movement of cargo through our ports more efficient, it's about building systems that bring discrete systems together to one place so that you don't have 200,000 different systems, because that's the number of users that use ports like LA or Long Beach. And so similar to what the Port of LA did a few years back, Port of Long Beach went down this path to develop a community portal that was part of a broader initiative that we call the Supply Chain Information Highway. And this was launched shortly after the pandemic, the supply chain crisis, because as Chris was pointing out, things were so bad that the data and the lack of visibility was magnified many times over. And a lot of the containers that were either on a ship making their way here, some of those ships were stuck at anchor, other ships were making their way here, but the data and the information sharing piece was wholly inefficient. It was very inadequate. And so what we learned then is how important it is to unleash the power of data sharing, of getting data, real, accurate, actionable data in the hands of our partners so that they can make real operational decisions in real time. And so that's what we did. Real-time data from connected equipment and cargo, for example, helps anticipate congestion, operational bottlenecks. It helps to improve visibility and transparency, and that all-important handoff between ship to truck or train. And when everyone who intersects the port has that data, they're working off the same sheet of data that's accurate, it makes the entire system more efficient. Predictive analytics, the question that came through, is a good one. One of our terminals in Long Beach, ITS, a few years ago, did a pilot project where they were test piloting predictive analytics. That project, it used technology to enable the motor carriers that visited that terminal to book an appointment 10 days before the ship arrived, which was very unheard of. And there was a lot that was learned from that experience. There were a lot of process improvements that came as a result of that. But as Chris pointed out, you know, technology will only get you so far. You've got to combine the technology with the processes and collaboration across different modes between the different industries and sectors. By using the Supply Chain Information Highway, for example, our customers have a means to track shipments, predict what's coming in, and know when a ship voyage has been canceled. And one of the latest iterations of that both ports, Long Beach and Los Angeles, are leveraging our respective community systems for, is to enable our shippers and their dray carriers to book appointments under a universal truck appointment system. This is something that both ports are collaborating on with the help of the state of California through its GoBiz department. And in a matter of months, all of port users will be able to go to one single site to book appointments across the Port of Long Beach and separately across the Port of LA, and eventually across the San Pedro Bay Ports complex, so that that would just make the entire process of booking appointments across the bay more seamless, more efficient, and less time consuming. So that's just another example of how we're leveraging technology and how technology plays a key role as a strategic enabler. And let me just end by saying something, doubling down on what Chris said, right? Right now, there's a lot of attention on AI, generative AI, the different uses. I mean, before we can get to a point where we can claim that AI is a solution for port operations, I think there's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of test piloting that needs to be done. And like Chris said, ultimately, what makes us resilient is not the equipment, it's not the technology, it's the people, and how people understand their roles, and how people follow certain processes to ensure that data is being shared and information is being communicated across the entire supply chain.
Excellent. So I have a question here on scaling up technologies, but I'm going to combine it with a question that's come in from the audience. So the question from the audience is, when will the Port of LA portal and the Port of Long Beach portal be combined into the San Pedro Bay portal?
Well, I sort of alluded to that, and I'll let Chris jump in on that, right? One touch point that we're both currently working on is that universal truck appointment system, right? We're trying to currently, here's a current state of affairs. If you want to book an appointment at a terminal in the Port of Long Beach or in the Port of LA, you got to go to that terminal's system and book the appointment through them. What both ports are working on right now with the assistance of the state of California is we're each developing a universal truck appointment system so that a shipper or their motor carrier can book appointment, for example, across Long Beach terminals, across LA terminals. Eventually, the goal, our objective, is to create a process where someone can go to a single place and book an appointment across the bay. Chris, I'll let you jump in.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Noel's right. We've been working at this. You know, we have started some of this. You are able to book through a common portal several of our terminals, but the macro level one is still a work in progress. And like everything else, how it's made is always a challenge, how we get this all together. And of course, we have two separate political entities running things, so we have to work through many different layers and everything else. So probably we'll see this in sometime in early 2026. A lot of this will come into fruition, be out there in the public, so we're very excited about that. And yeah, the state of California is really helping us get this going, and because that's something they can do to help. And again, it's all about being more efficient, getting more space on those freeways, getting less emissions. At the end of the day, most of this is done to for the green bona fides of what happens for both these both our facilities, because without cleaning the air, reducing our footprints of carbon, we have a tough time getting to the next level, which is to keep growing and keep employing Californians and people around the country. As Noel and I both talk about a lot, both our ports touch every single congressional district in this country from our docks. So it all makes a difference. And we'd like to point that out to politicians as they do things, but to get that ability to do that, we need to have many opportunities to clean things up. So this is one of those areas in which we're going to do it. And I think that's going to be great, and help people do this, be more efficient. And I think Noel touched on it, but one of the other things too is to move those appointments. If you do have an issue, you need to move an appointment, you can see where you can move it to, or if you need to drop one facility and pick up it somewhere else, you can do that all on that screen. And that's going to be the other big part of it. It's not to make that initial appointment, but it's making that adjusted appointment, because that's a big part of everybody's day-to-day operations is, dealing with the changes.
Thank you. So another piece of software which is really important for customers is tracking and tracing. So Vince, I want to pose this question to you.
Yeah.
Which technology do you feel has improved tracking and tracing most significantly for products such as perishables and food shipments?
Yeah. So I'm going to combine that to the next 2 points together. I think that's a great point. So I do want to point to the paper, and that we had a case study in there with a large retailer on produce back when it was blockchain, before AI, that was very successful in tracking from farm to store, right? And that was an early success case on AI. They were optimizing SKUs. They were also tracking food for safety in case of recalls and things of that nature. And the second part of the case study was a large global shipper that was optimizing throughput on the inventory side. And we saw that a lot at the end of the pandemic with our customers with SKU management. To show you how fast this is moving, by the time we started to work on the paper, from the time we printed the paper, things are changing like daily. So, at Alba, our use of AI right now is pervasive with a couple of guardrails. The three areas that we see a lot of traction, where we saw traction early, were with UFLPA, with microchips, with apparel, our two largest sectors. We were leveraging our partnerships with Trade Verified, and there are other options out there to de-risk for UFLPA, because in the end, where it ties back to this committee and this discussion is that if I'm stuck for weeks and weeks on the pier with CBP on a stop, I'm not getting to market, and the demurrage and the tension is just skyrocketing, right? So that's where we dipped our toe in first on predictive analytics and also de-risking the parties. Since then, we are it's pervasive. We're document reading with it. We're leveraging classification tools with it. Our third stool is the analytics on supply chain alone, not tied to regulatory enforcement. Optimizing for all the things that Chris and Noel were talking about, right? What port is it coming into? What's our free time? Later on, if we have time, we're now, because of the court cases on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, tracking demurrage and detention is important again, right? Like getting that demurrage and detention data right is important. And now we're starting to see our supply chain visibility tools just on the transport side, not related to regulatory enforcement, starting to leverage it. A couple of guardrails here. As brokers, we have a reasonable care standard in our regs as importer. We have a responsible supervision standard. Importers have a reasonable care standard. So however you leverage this, I think Noel alluded to this too in the port example. However you leverage it, you still have to meet those standards, and you still need reviews, and you still need to be on top of the compliance. But it is a shifting landscape. The ground is shifting underneath us a bit, and that we have to stay ahead of it. So we see applications in those three areas: regulatory holds at ports. The last thing I'll say about it is that what started with UFLPA, we're waiting for guidance on what transshipment means out of Vietnam with Chinese inputs. They're waiting to see a USMCA reboot next year on what content guidelines are going to look like past the first tier of the supplier. So aren't we at the point as a supply chain as a whole where you're going to have to know your chain all the way down, right? Knowing that first tier or the seller is just not enough. That's been our experience, so far, Daniel.
Vince, just sticking with that for one moment. So how is AI enhancing or optimizing those solutions that are out there?
Well, I'm not the tech guy, okay? But at a high level, we saw AI de-risking the parties and the supply chains past the first tier for UFLPA, right? That's the short version of it, right? Now you might have to do that for Chinese content and manufacturing in other Southeast Asian countries, right? The AI on the visibility tools on the supply chain side, I think work very much aligned the way Chris and Noel discussed, okay? Gathering the data. I thought Chris made a great point by saying that we have all been doing this in the private sector on our own since 2020, 21. Like, we couldn't wait, right? But everybody has their own system. I think Noel's onto something with the interoperability of the Long Beach product as well. So we definitely see it on the supply chain side as well.
Just a quick note to the audience: if you want to submit questions, please just use the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen there. I do have a couple here, and we are going to save some time at the end of this discussion to get to your questions. Any that we don't get to during the webinar, then we're going to ask the team afterwards, and we'll include it in the email response. So don't worry about if we don't get to it in the discussion. So a question to Chris and Noel. How can ports, as well as importers and exporters, adopt new technologies without falling behind on regulatory requirements? And starting with you, Chris.
Well, you asked a tough one. I mean, we're, like I said, we're landlords, so regulatory requirements for us is probably a little different than it is for our terminal operators, our shipping lines, and everybody else. but the idea is, everything else we're talking about here is how do we deal with what we have to deal with in our day-to-day operations, and everybody's going to deal with it a little differently. And I think that's probably the hardest thing for everyone is it's not going to be done the same. And, as a port, we can, generally speaking, we can create what we both have created, which is port community system, something overarching over the top to help that communication. But when it comes to, the very specifics of how you have to submit documents and everything else, that is not what the port does. We do it for environmental programs, we do it for other things related to port construction. But when it comes to moving your cargo, that's up to your carrier, your shipping line, your carrier, your terminal, and whoever else in your third-party logistics chain is involved. So I think, all these tools, I think, can be very, very helpful. Of course, it's that, as you said, there's got to be guide rails on a lot of this, especially as it's morphing and changing day to day, as we have, somebody comes up with something new every day, kind of the Wild West mentality that we're dealing with, which is we just don't know what's around the corner. I mean, we can laugh and think about it, but I started working for a carrier in 1995. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have a cell phone. I mean, I just got a cell phone. I mean, and then there's this crazy company that started selling books online, and we didn't even know how to order them because they were online, right? And now, of course, they're one of the biggest companies in the world. So what does 30 some odd years look like? And I think that's the challenge here today, where we're solving today's problems. But I think you touched on it, is that it's looking around that corner for what's next, or what does this lead to? And I think that's what we don't know. And I don't know how that comes. So I know it's not a specific answer, but that's kind of how we see a lot of this.
Are you still holding on to those shares that you got in that online book company, Chris?
Oh, if I had, I wouldn't be talking to you guys today. I'd be sitting at a beach somewhere with a tropical drink. I guarantee that.
Excellent. Noel, same question to you. How can ports or importers and exporters adopt new technologies without falling behind on regulatory requirements?
Yeah, it's a very good question, very hard to answer, right? I mean, as landlord port authorities, you could make the argument that in the last 10, maybe 12 years, we've taken a more hands-on approach as it relates to operations, only because of all the impacts of these disruptions, right? We've been forced to get more involved. We've been forced to become more aware. And this is why organizations like AAEI, the good work you do vis-a-vis this committee, the white paper, it's so important that ports like ours have visibility into this, because you are the ones driving the market. We're here to support you. We're here to be your partner and make sure that your goods get to market as quickly as possible. And this is why working with Vince, for example, on that e-commerce white paper pilot project is so important, because if you were to ask Chris and me, hey, how many times do you get contacted by a technology vendor who has the solution to all of your problems? I get at least 5 of those calls a week, right? And that's not even counting emails. Yeah, a day. That's not even counting the emails. I turn my email
off when I'm on these calls, because it just comes in software. We'll sell you something. So yeah.
So for us, again, we're not trying to reinvent. We're not trying to replicate what all of you are doing. All of you are in a much better position to evaluate, assess, and determine what's going to be better for you. What's going to make your operation optimize? What's going to improve your bottom line? What we want to do is make sure that the investments we make, not just in the physical infrastructure, but in the digital infrastructure, is a strategic enabler. In other words, we create a forum where these different systems that are discrete and proprietary can exchange information to bring some standardization, to bring some harmonization, to bring some interoperability. We're like that conductor in an orchestra, right? All of you are the musicians. You have your own instruments. You have your own, instruments to play your instruments. And all we want to do is make sure that when you all make your music, it sounds good, right? It sounds great. And this is why, again, keeping up with technology, it's evolving so quickly, keeping up with the trends. For example, I'll give you one mega trend that we've been tracking for some time now, the shift from China to Southeast Asia. It's real, it's accelerating. The other big trend that continues to accelerate vis-a-vis the trade war is e-commerce. I mean, we're seeing all these trends in motion. We're seeing it on the export side as well. Those of you who are on the export side, you see these massive shifts with specific commodities like soybeans, for example. Would you know that here in the Port of Long Beach, just in the last year, we've seen a 93% drop in exports to China for soybeans. Here is the United States of America, producer of 28% of the world's soybeans, and China is buying more soybeans from Brazil than they are from the US. I mean, these shifts are real. And when these trade decisions are made overseas and tariffs are imposed, it has a ripple effect across the supply chain. So this is why it's important for us to try to keep up with the mega trends, and why it's so vitally important for us, for Chris and me, to hear from Vince and from Daniel and from all of you.
Yeah, if I could jump in there,
Absolutely.
I do have to say that some of the discussions we had on the committee came out of Southern California, and I do want to just tell this story real quickly, that a bunch of stakeholders called Noel back in 20, and so many e-commerce containers. I like to say that the port of entry for Northern Baja is the Port of Long Beach and the Port of LA, right? Those are the ports of entry for Northern Baja for e-commerce. You know, a couple of stakeholders, myself included, called the Port of Long Beach, who was getting a lot of Mexico containers, and we had demurrage, we had detention. People were going to go to Canada, and something similar on the LA side for Inland Empire of containers that were going out to fulfillment and out east on the 60 freeway. And Noel put a group together, started talking about these issues real time, really highlighted everything they're saying. I know that we have MTDI on here. I don't know if we're going to have time to get to it, but the Maritime Trade Data Initiative for FMC came out of this issue that all of us are leveraging our own data, right? And if I could channel Peter Friedman for a second, I'm sure I have his permission to say his name. I remember Peter saying back then, when you want to know what time your plane is landing, you don't call LAX, right? You call the airline, right? And so having some sort of common set of high level data points that we could all share, and because we didn't have that structured Port of Long Beach and Noel's team for Northern Mexico, and then the LA team did it for Inland Empire, we did it ourselves in LA, just to keep the commerce moving. So definitely more work to do on that. And sometimes resiliency is not the IT, it's the people that make that decision to have that meeting. So and to have that meeting for a year and a half, like you guys did, Noel. So
yeah, that's very kind of you to mention, Vince. But let me also say this: if it wasn't for you bringing those customers to us and making sure that this situation, this challenge was on our radar, we would never have created this collaborative solution, right? So again, it takes all of us, right? It took you bringing these customers to us saying, hey, we have this issue with detention demurrage. These are hot containers. They're time sensitive. We've got to find another way to get them to market. And that's why, again, AAEI forums like these are so important, because as smart as Chris and I are, we don't know everything. And we certainly, it's impossible to keep up with the latest of what's happening. But what we do want to let all of you know is we've got big ears. We're here to hear. We're here to listen. We're troubleshooters. We're problem solvers. And we're your partners. We want you to be successful.
Thank you. So part of the discussion there was talking about the sharing of data. And on that topic, what do you think are the biggest cybersecurity concerns for the ports today, and how are they being addressed? Going to you, Chris.
Well, yeah, so obviously that's a hot topic always, whether it be yourself or your company or anybody else, because we did stand up as a port. We did something kind of unique. We've done actually two things. We have internally, we have what we call a cyber resilience center. And it's about a decade old now, maybe 11 years, almost 12 years old. And it's basically a repository of where we're monitoring everything. And our latest data, which I just pulled up before this call, we're averaging 94 million intrusion attempts to our systems per month.
Wow.
Per month. So what's that? They said it's like just a little less than 100 per second. Now, I grant most of those are the phishing emails that you get, the Saudi prince, or not Saudi prince, some prince wants to give you his money, right? That's a lot of it. But we do see much bigger ones, and we've had number of our customers, both Noel's, the carriers, have been hit by some serious cyber attacks, and it really started with the one that Maersk had, more than a decade ago, and that's kind of started this. So we're in conjunction with Homeland Security, ourselves, the Coast Guard, and FBI, all those kind of agencies. They run it in our operations just to monitor this, because it is so much, and we see the threats from somebody in their basement fooling around their computer to government-backed hacking operations, and we see it all. And then on top of that, what we've done is we stood up another IT-related item, cybersecurity item, I should say, was our Cybersecurity Operations Center. And this is, the idea is taking our information, sharing it with other people, and they sharing their information back anonymously. So what we're doing is, we say, hey, we just got hit by this. Has anybody else seen it? And in same thing in return. And we can say, again, millions and millions of things we have, we can see from around the world who's doing things and what they're going after. And in conjunction with IBM, it's 24/7 operations, but we also have most of our vendors. So most of our terminals, we're trying to get more carriers involved. We're trying to get other people, even our cruise lines, like my picture behind me, the cruise lines involved, anybody, because everybody gets hit. And the more we can share, the better. And we can honestly say that we have told a couple of people, including some big companies, that we see a cyber attempt happening in your company and they hadn't caught it yet. So that just paid for the millions of dollars we spend on this, just paid for itself, because we protected that. We protected ourselves and everything else. And I think that's probably, when it comes to a lot of this, one of the biggest areas in which, well, AI is fantastic and it's going to be so impressive to everything we do. But the flip side of that is, how do we keep protected? And I think that's one of the big areas in which, at least for us, that is one of the big areas of concern. I can tell you that this, from our point of view and at the port, we are definitely slow walking AI use internally. And a big part of that is because of our cybersecurity operations, not wanting to jump into this, just because the threat level is so high, and obviously we control a lot of data, or we get a lot of data, but nothing near what the companies out there have. I mean, ours is mostly billing and a few port-related operations, but that is the big concern for us. Is in all of this is the cybersecurity. What do we do to protect ourselves and not let somebody inside? And for us, it's financial, like it is for everybody else. It's a big threat, and you can see what happens when it goes wrong. You've got ports, you've got lines, you've got different, third-party logistics or retailers that are all stuck when they get their stuff hacked, and then we can't do that. And then, it doesn't work. So it doesn't get you moving your cargo very fast if nothing works.
Oh, what would you add?
Yeah, I like what Chris said, and I would add that for us in Long Beach, cybersecurity is always a priority, right? You can never be too safe. And in addition to all the technology vendors that offer us and contact us on a daily basis, what will make us more efficient, there's an equal number, or maybe 2 or 3 times as many, who say, hey, this is what will make you cyber safe. The reality is, we're only as strong and we're only as safe as our weakest link. And cybersecurity is not just something that we do on our own. There has to be a culture that has to extend beyond the Port Authority and to our partners, every mode, every segment, every industry. The example that Chris pointed out, where an ocean carrier was targeted somewhere in Europe, ended up impacting one of their terminals here in LA. I mean, this is real. I mean, you've got professional hackers that do nothing but try to hack systems and try to get into systems for their own advantage and to create disruption. I mean, here we are talking about disruption. Cyber attack is probably one of the most significant forms of disruption that could effectively shut down an entire supply chain. And for us, it's not just about the terminals, the ships, the cranes, the trucks, the trains. Think about the economic impact to the national economy. Chris pointed this out earlier. All the containers that cross our docks on an annual basis, they touch all 435 congressional districts. Between the 2 ports, we handle about $600–700 billion worth of goods on an annual basis. We generate almost 10 million jobs a year. I mean, this is real. And so for that reason, ports like ours, industry like ours, become targets. So in addition to some of the initiatives that Chris mentioned that we're doing on our end as well, we have a similar number of attempted intrusions a month. It's staggering when you think about the volume. And part of the reason for that, Chris, is I think people don't recognize, right, that we're the airport, we're not the airline, right? So they think that by hacking our systems, they're shutting down the terminals and the operations. But that being the case, having good cyber hygiene, making sure that our employees, the employees in our terminals, the employees who work for the ocean carriers, everyone who touches our port and our domain, making sure that they're exercising good cyber hygiene. And so here in our port, for example, we have quarterly trainings. It's required. Every single employee has to take the training. We have tests that you have to pass. There are phishing attempts, and we catch employees all the time, right? We haven't gotten a perfect score yet, but it's a reminder, right, how important it is to continue to draw attention, create awareness. And again, at a time when we as an industry, as a supply chain, are trying to become more interconnected, at a time that we're trying to get our systems to talk to each other, to connect, we also have to be mindful of the importance of cybersecurity across the entire system.
Thank you. So sticking with technology, Vince, I want to get you back into the conversation here. Can you share an example where technology helped avoid a penalty or improve audit readiness?
I would. I'm mindful of the time. 12:53. Yeah, I think the most obvious would be the first example I gave on where on visibility tools, where we were able to help some importers predict risk on UFLPA better, and avoid some detentions. Some of those first detentions were gnarly, to use a Southern California word. They were really costly, right? Many weeks on the pier. The ports were coming to us as well, saying we don't really want these containers on the pier either. So I think that would be the most obvious one. And then I think there are a lot of tools out there, a lot of AEI members. There are a lot of visibility tools now on the supply chain side. I think that's where they were ahead of compliance, I think, and now maybe the compliance and regulatory tools were featured in the past year and a half. But I think we're swinging back to supply chain visibility and demurrage and attention avoidance by optimizing this data, especially since Ocean Shipping Reform Act rules about who you can bill for demurrage and detention were overturned in the courts recently. And now I'm not saying it's going to go back to where it was in 2020. I'm not saying that, but it is something that we all have to watch again, right? If you get a bill from a terminal, and you have to really be able to back up when that container left, when it arrived, was the chassis picked up in a different place or the delivered in a different place. That's how this committee actually started talking about those issues back then. So full circle, could be some real costs associated with demurrage, detention, and per diem. And if you have to track it and prove it, I mean, the technology is there to do it.
So the last topic on my list here is the Federal Maritime Commission initiatives. And Vince, you touched on this earlier. Why is the FMC's Maritime Transportation Data Initiative important for the industry?
Angela's going to have to give us the hook when it's time, but I do want to mention it because a lot of the committee members, and before we head out, I just want to extend to Noel and Chris that this committee wants to be a resource to the ports. Our whole committee wants to be a resource on these issues. So thank you for that offer. The Maritime Transportation Data Initiative was an initiative by Federal Maritime Commission. There were findings all about the things that Chris and Noel talked about, right? Are there a couple of data sets that we could all agree on? And as the conversation went on, the data set got smaller. because of the disagreement between carriers and terminals, and some of it was legitimate, right? Like one terminal, how do they count wait time versus the other terminal? You know, is it outside the gate, inside the gate? Is everybody's KPI is going to be uniform? It's a big issue, right? Especially if you're going to use the data commercially. So the FMC made recommendations. It did not make it into any of the OSRA legislation. We have it in the paper. The committee spent a lot of time on it, and it's really not going. There's no legs for it in any legislation. But I think I'll turn it back to Chris and Noel real quick. Like, I don't think the issue has gone away because we don't have the volume, right? Has the issue really gone away about this data issue, about sharing it better and leveraging the data to avoid these disruptions? I'll ask them.
Chris, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I mean, you hit on one of the biggest ones that we've all talked about is, yeah, how do you define a truck turn time? And, you know, the most terminals are pedestal to pedestal, as we say, which, you know, most of us can get around, but it does not address waiting in line. And that obviously can be a big issue for some facilities, and other facilities not much of an issue. But, you know, I think the challenge a lot of this is everybody's trying to find a perfect solution, as opposed to, I mean, I guess since the Dodgers won, I'll break out a baseball analogy. We need to hit more singles and less home runs. How does that sound? You know, get some of this done. You know, when we did our data piece, obviously we ran into the same issues that people were like, we are not giving you anything off our bills of lading, you know, and we didn't want everything. We wanted, you know, about 5 simple things: port of loading, port of discharge, size of the container, you know, hazardous or not. You know, that there wasn't much beyond that we wanted, and that's not much more than we do, but it gives us the baseline in which to work from. And I think that is some of the pieces here that probably is more of something that we need to think about as we do this. And I'm not as involved with the FMC side. We got other people on staff doing that. No, I don't know about you, but the end of the day is we have certain pieces of data that are innocuous to a large degree. It's not going to offend anybody because it's not, you know, you have a container number, but someone who's entitled to that can know it. But if you go and, for example, track and trace, you have to enter your information and that container number, but doesn't give you anything more than where it is, which you could do on somebody's website anyway. We're just doing it that you can do it across more. And I think that's some of the things that we overcame early on that we tried to impose upon a lot of people was, you know, if you want every single piece of data, it's not going to work, but let's find the ones that do work.
Yeah,
you know, let's find the ones that can have...
I'm getting a 1 minute.
Oh, sorry, I will shut up then.
Let's keep go on and on and on. Noel, I don't know if you want to say anything like for a minute or two, or
sure. And I'll keep it short and sweet. But I mean, you know, what I like about what the FMC did, and big shout out to former Commissioner Bensel. He was the one who was really promoting this MTDI. But it was all about coming up with common definitions for some of these key metrics. And just as importantly, having a single version of truth that was reliable, right? So that when there was any hiccups, any issues across the supply chain, you could lean on that. And that's really what it was about, establishing national standards for the maritime supply chain for data collection and sharing. And again, big kudos to Carl Bensel, who's now running NAWI, and grateful for the FMC's involvement. And again, Vince, Daniel, and to the AAEI, thank you so much for the invitation. Grateful for you for this, and also for the fact that you will continue being a resource to the ports.
Yeah. Hey, I just got to wrap it up and say this webinar has been approved for credit. There is a verification code for obtaining credit for participating in the event. Future events are at aaei.org. And I want to thank everybody again before we sign out. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving for next week.
Everybody.
Oh, yes.
Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care.